I am a person from a civilized society on Earth. These are the thoughts of an old man as he coughs, his breath rattling in a body that has finally reached its limit. A young boy interrupts his fading consciousness, calling out to Old Man Seo and offering a bowl of food his mother sent over. The boy tells him to get well soon so he can make soap for them again, but as he leaves the old man alone in the quiet, falling snow, it's clear that soon is a luxury Seo no longer has. He reflects on his life one last time, a man of Earth, trapped in this cursed world for 50 long years. It all began with a landslide that swept his car off the road. When he and his companions finally came to their senses, they found themselves in a land of myth and nightmare. There were three-tailed foxes the size of houses, gigantic two-headed snakes with shimmering red scales, and strange people who could actually fly through the sky. He realized then that he had fallen into the world of an immortal cultivation novel, the very kind of story he used to read back home. But he wasn't the protagonist. One by one, the others who came with him were taken away to the heavens by the powerful beings of this world, leaving only him and a man known as Director Kim. They waited for a long time, hoping that some mystical power or unique ability would awaken within them, too. It never happened. With no magic to speak of, they were forced into the only life available to them, grueling physical labor. 6 months into their new life, Director Kim reached his breaking point. He took every bit of money he had saved and spent it on a third-rate martial arts book sold on the streets. Against all odds, Kim mastered the techniques in just 3 months and became a true martial artist. Soon after, he became a powerful warrior and left for the martial realm, leaving Seo behind with nothing but a shovel. Seo held on to a glimmer of hope, wondering if something special would eventually happen to him, too. But as the years turned into decades, his hands grew calloused and his body grew frail. Now, 50 years later, he is just a mere old man dying from a common cold. He lived his life with sheer desperation, struggling to learn how to read and write while barely scraping by. He eventually managed to buy a small patch of land and build a house by introducing soap to this medieval-like society. For a moment, he found success, as soap was an oddity no one had seen before. However, even that was taken from him. Thieves stole his methods of production, and brutes used their strength to drive him out of the market entirely. Now, he sits in the cold, rejected by the world and awaiting his death. He asks the empty room what he was supposed to do. He did his best, but the world didn't care. He weeps, blood flecking his lips, wondering why things always had to be taken from him. Even if he wasn't a chosen person or someone special, he couldn't understand why he had to lose everything. He no longer has the strength to even open his eyes as the winter wind howls through the cracks of his hut. His final, fading thoughts are a plea for just a bit of ability, or a single small opportunity. Then, there is a blinding flash of light. A sharp, desperate gasp for air follows as the world rushes back in. Looking up, the protagonist sees a clear, bright blue sky, a sight he hasn't seen in a very long time. He finds himself lying in the grass, staring at his hands in disbelief. He's alive, and more strangely, he's wearing the same clothes he had on back on Earth. Nearby, he hears others groaning in pain, clutching their heads and wondering where they are. His eyes snap open, clear and sharp once again. He realizes then that he didn't enter this world empty-handed after all. He didn't just survive, he had awakened the ultimate ability, the power to regress. This marks the official start of his first regression. The landscape is lush and green, just as it was 50 years ago. Director Kim, his old boss from his previous life, is already in a panic, shouting that this must be the day they fell into this strange world. He remembers they were in an SUV headed to a workshop when a massive landslide swept them away. It was a flash in the dark, a memory that had grown hazy over 5 decades of suffering. As Kim babbles on, the protagonist, Deputy Manager Seo, stands quietly, wondering how he should live this time around. In most stories, regressors use future knowledge to thrive, but he realizes with a hint of irony that his only specialized skill is making soap. His thoughts are interrupted when Section Chief John suddenly grabs his shoulder, screaming his name. Before Seo can even apologize for being startled, the chief winds up and delivers a brutal slap across his face. The others watch in stunned silence. John stands over the grounded Seo, calling him a crazy son of a bitch and accusing him of dozing off at the wheel. He rants that they all could have died because of his negligence. Seo sits there, feeling the sting on his cheek, realizing he had actually forgotten what it was like to be spoken to this way. He looks at John and remembers who he really is, the nephew of the executive director, a man who attained his position through pure nepotism at 32. Another man tries to intervene, suggesting that Seo couldn't have avoided a landslide, but John is inconsolable, continuing to shout that the frustrating prick is the reason they are stranded. Seo slowly begins to pick himself up, acknowledging that he did indeed doze off. But the memories are becoming clearer now, he remembers he was only tired because the chief had dumped all of his own work on him, forcing him to work grueling overtime. In his first life, Seo was so flustered that he just bowed his head and apologized, genuinely believing he had made a mistake. For the next 50 years, that became his life, always apologizing. He apologized to bandits as they trampled him and stole his money, to brutal martial artists who humiliated him, to corrupt local officials who stripped him of everything under the guise of taxes. After enduring all of that for so long, he finally realized a fundamental truth: you only have to endure those you cannot handle. His hand clenches into a tight fist as he realizes that doesn't apply here. He looks the chief in the eye and addresses him calmly. He tells John that while he understands the anger, pointing fingers isn't going to help their situation. John is outraged by the talkback, calling him a lousy little nothing and swinging a heavy punch at Seo's head. But this time, Seo is faster. He avoids the blow and strikes back with a devastating punch that sends the chief reeling. The bystanders are frozen in absolute shock. As Seo stands over him, he reflects on how many times he was beaten by martial artists in his past life. He doesn't stop. He lands another massive hit, the sound of the impact echoing through the clearing. He remembers the bandits in the mountains, the thieves during the famine, the tax officials who beat him for being poor. He channels 50 years of suppressed rage into a relentless barrage of strikes, leaving John screaming in agony. The others can only watch in horror as Seo demonstrates the one thing he learned through decades of senseless violence, a lesson John doesn't know yet. He knows that when you hit someone in the eyes, their fear is intensified. He looks down at his bloody knuckles, knowing that once a person is beaten enough, their true nature naturally comes out. Broken and sobbing, the formerly arrogant chief can only stammer out a desperate apology. It's a pathetic sight, and it confirms everything Seo has come to understand about power in this world. As the dust settles, the group stands in stunned silence, looking down at the broken section chief John. One of the men finally finds his voice, muttering that while the situation is bad, beating a colleague to this extent might be going a bit too far. Seo lets out a long, heavy sigh and admits that they're right, claiming he just suddenly lost his temper in the heat of the moment and apologizing if his outburst shocked everyone. Internally, he's cold and calculating. He knows that in the grand scheme of things, he'll never have to see these people again anyway, so he bows deeply and offers a formal apology for the car accident since he was the one behind the wheel. The older director watches him, acknowledging that while Section Chief John was definitely being too harsh given the circumstances, Seo's reaction was still far too violent. He sternly orders Seo to apologize directly to John. Seo looks at the director and immediately agrees, but his mind is already light years ahead. He remembers Director Kim from his previous life. This man is a sleeping giant who will become the strongest person in the world once he discovers martial arts. Seo realizes that if he wants to survive and thrive this time, he needs to actively support the director and stay on his good side starting right now. With his plan in place, Seo turns back to the battered John and tells him he truly apologizes for going too far. John, his face bloodied and bruised, can only glare up at him, trembling as he wheezes out a desperate, "You bastard." Seo meets his gaze with an expressionless, hollow look that suggests he isn't even seeing the man anymore. The director, trying to regain control of the group, suggests they focus on getting out of the forest to find a nearby village. But Seo knows the grim reality: in this place, common sense is a death sentence. They are standing in a realm where immortals fly through the heavens to obtain eternal life and martial artists slaughter each other for honor and wealth, a world that strictly follows the law of the jungle. This beautiful, treacherous land is known as the Ascension Path, and within the vicinity of this forest, there are no villages, cities, or countries to offer them sanctuary. The director pauses, stroking his chin as he considers the situation and eventually agrees with Seo's assessment. He suggests they at least try to find a car, remembering they had packed it full of workshop supplies that would be vital for their survival. Seo watches him, keeping his thoughts to himself. He knows for a fact they will never find a car because he's lived through this nightmare before. To keep the peace, they split up. One team searches for a place to stay while the other looks for the car, agreeing to regroup at the clearing before the sun completely disappears. Night falls over the rugged terrain, and a small fire begins to crackle in the darkness. One of the women in the group sighs, confused about how they could have been inside a car during a landslide only to wake up outside with the vehicle nowhere in sight. They sit around the fire, chewing on some strange plant Seo found, surprised that the local flora actually tastes like raw chestnuts. Seo watches them eat, assuring everyone that he picked plenty so no one has to go hungry. The director reflects on Seo's earlier exhaustion, noting that he only dozed off because he had been forced to work a grueling night shift the day before. The women chime in, praising Seo for being so diligent and remarking that it almost feels like they're out on a camping trip because he managed to find this perfect cave for them. Seo smiles and says he just got lucky, but in his head, he remembers the hours of desperate, blind searching it took to find this same spot in his past life. As the group starts to laugh and relax, someone tells Seo he should at least pretend to be happy at a time like this. Seo looks at their smiling faces and thinks to himself that he really should enjoy this moment, because he knows it's the very last time they will ever be able to laugh together. Under the cold glow of the full moon, the atmosphere suddenly shifts into a nightmare. Seo begins to tremble violently, his face pale with terror as he drops to the ground to greet the master of the forest. A massive, black-furred wolf with glowing red eyes looms over him, its voice booming as it remarks that Seo has a unique scent it hasn't encountered in thousands of years. The sound of the beast's voice wakes the others, and one of the women rubs her eyes, groggily asking what all the noise is about. The group erupts into total chaos as one of the women screams at the top of her lungs, terrified by the massive monster towering over them. Knowing the absolute danger they are in, Seo barks out a desperate order for everyone to show their respect to the master of the forest and drop to their knees immediately. The giant wolf growls that every time it encounters insignificant humans, they are always the foolish and rude sort, admitting that it normally would have torn all their limbs off right then and there. However, the beast pauses, noting that because one of them actually knows how to pay proper reverence, it will grant them a rare moment of forgiveness. Seo reflects on his past life, remembering how no one knew anything back then and their blind screaming only served to enrage the fox. In that previous timeline, the beast's immediate wrath had left the entire group dead, their broken bodies scattered across the clearing with their limbs torn away. Now, thanks to his display of respect, the fox is showing a terrifying kind of favor, but it still demands a price. It licks its chops and asks who among them will offer up their arm. Seo looks on with a cold, focused intensity, realizing that only one person's arm needs to be sacrificed to save the rest of the group. He knows from his future knowledge that this world is populated by healers known as cultivators, who are scheduled to arrive in just 2 days and could easily mend such a wound. Furthermore, he has already gone through the trouble of preparing a special pain relief herb to make the upcoming ordeal at least somewhat bearable. Steeling his resolve, Seo speaks up and offers his own arm as the tribute to the master of the forest. The wolf is impressed by the human who knows respect and promises that since it has acknowledged his reverence, it will make the consumption as painless as possible. The silence of the forest is shattered by Seo's agonizing scream as blood sprays across the grass. With a sickening crunch, the beast tosses its head back and swallows the offered limb whole in a single motion. Seo collapses in a state of pure shock, his vision blurring as he reaches desperately for the pain relief herb he had prepared. The pain is white-hot and overwhelming, and he frantically shoves the herb into his mouth as tears of agony stream down his face. The fox licks its chops, unimpressed by the flavor. It grumbles that despite Seo's unique scent, his blood is full of impurities and has a stale, bitter aftertaste. As the herb begins to dull the throbbing ache, Seo weakly bows his head and offers his apologies for the lacking tribute. Satisfied enough for now, the wolf accepts his respect and permits the group to stay in its territory for 7 days, even infusing Seo with a bit of divine power so he won't die from the wound. The massive creature vanishes in a thunderous blur of speed, leaving Seo gasping on the ground in the wake of its power. The director helps the group move back toward the safety of the cave, while a pale, one-armed Seo promises to explain everything once they are inside. Once they settle in, Seo tells them he actually encountered the fox earlier that morning and learned the shocking truth about their location. The director is nearly speechless, repeating the name, the martial realm, in total disbelief. The older man can hardly wrap his head around the news, laughing nervously as he realizes he has entered a world of myth and legend in his own lifetime. Seo confirms they have exactly 1 week of safety bought by the price of his arm, which prompts a terrified section chief John to ask what on earth happens when that week is over. Outside, a haunting purple moon hangs over the landscape as the weight of their grim situation finally begins to sink in. Inside the cave, the group is already beginning to turn on John, appalled that he would even think of complaining after Seo literally sacrificed his own limb to save them all. John defends his selfishness, pointing out that none of them would be willing to let the fox eat their arms or legs when the week is up. The director tries to keep the group's focus on survival, noting that Seo has been their only source of food and shelter and that they need to learn everything they can from him while they have the chance. But in the shadows of the cave, John watches the wounded Seo with predatory, calculating eyes, whispering that since the man is already broken, they should just ensure he's the one who gets sacrificed to the beast next time around as well.